Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into a stack of sources covering some recent events that are being described broadly as abuses of power.
That's right.
And our mission here is to pull out the most important bits of information, the key insights, help you understand what's really going on, beyond just the headlines, hopefully spark some of those aha moments.
Absolutely. And these sources, they really offer a fascinating look, don't they, at decisions, actions across so many different areas.
Like what specifically?
Well, we're talking federalizing a city, international trade, even university governance.
Wow.
And also how numbers get presented, how official data is handled, and even how private wealth might be generated from public office.
Okay.
It's really about putting these diverse pieces together, spotting those crucial patterns.
All right, let's dive in. First topic.
Right.
The nation's capital, Washington, D.C. What's the big news coming out of there, according to these sources?
Well, the source material really leads with a intentionally striking headline. Trump invades Washington, D.C.
Invades? That's strong language.
It is. And the source says they actually debated the wording.
Ah.
But they settled on invasion because, well, their view was sending troops to D.C. without any real justification is close enough to qualify.
Okay, so what actions actually led to that headline? What was the justification given?
Right. So after sort of teasing an announcement, he declared an emergency in D.C.
An emergency?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then he used authority under the District of Columbia Home Rule Act.
Right, the Home Rule Act.
To take control of the Capitol Police and deploy National Guard troops.
And the reason?
The stated justification was that D.C., and this is a quote, has been overtaken by criminals and drugged out maniacs and homeless people. The press conference itself was described in the sources as, well, rambling, even bringing up things like trans girls playing high school sports, seemingly unrelated.
Okay, but here's where it gets interesting, right? The sources talk about the reality versus those claims. What does the data actually show about crime in D.C.?
Yeah, this is key. The sources state pretty clearly that crime is not, in fact, out of control.
Really?
There's actually been a consistent downward trend for about 15 years. Crime is currently at a 30-year low, with one exception.
Which is?
2023. There was a spike in 2023. But the sources suggest that spike was almost certainly caused by the pandemic.
Okay.
And they argue that this single year's data, this outlier, was basically used to spin that data as aggressively as is possible, even though the administration likely knew it was an exception.
Wow. That's quite a claim. So why D.C.? Why pick D.C. as the target for this kind of action?
Well, the sources lay out a few reasons why D.C. makes, in their words, an excellent whipping boy.
Okay.
First, it's the seat of government, reportedly unpopular with his base.
Right.
Second, it's very democratic, also unpopular with the base, according to the sources.
Makes sense.
Third, it's very black. The source notes much of his base reportedly dislikes black people. D.C.'s actually one of only 6 cities in the U.S., over 500,000 people, and over 40% black.
Interesting demographic point.
Yeah. The sources also bring up some specific incidents. The murders of Israeli embassy staff, Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Milgram, an assault on Edward Korestein, saying these events, through confirmation bias, wrongly reinforce that perception of D.C. being crime-ridden.
So specific events feeding a narrative.
Exactly. And finally, D.C.'s unique status as a federal district just gives him more power to, well, impose himself with less resistance than he'd face in a state city.
And the sources also point out some inconsistencies between these actions and things he's said before.
Yes, that's another important angle. During that press conference, he said part of the reason for the action was to make sure D.C. police are treated with respect.
Okay.
But, as the sources note, he just pardoned hundreds of people who beat those very same police during the January 6th events.
That is quite a contradiction.
And there's more. Back in 2021 and again in 2024, he claimed that Nancy Pelosi, the speaker at the time, was responsible for not deploying the National Guard on January 6th. He said it was out of his hands.
Right. I remember that.
Which is, as the source puts it, a very different take on presidential power than the one he's asserting now over D.C.
Definitely seems like a shift. So what do the sources predict happens next? For D.C. or maybe even other cities?
Well, legally, the emergency is supposed to only last 30 days.
Right.
Now, it's possible they could try to ignore that limit or maybe just quietly back down.
Uh-huh.
But the sources think a more likely scenario is that he finds another city to target when he needs a new distraction.
Like who?
They hinted at places like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. basically using it as red meat for the base.
And isn't there a legal challenge already happening related to the National Guard?
Yes, good point. California is actually fighting him in court right now over his use of the National Guard there. And reportedly that case is going poorly for the administration.
Interesting. So looking beyond the immediate 30 days, is there a potential long-term consequence for D.C. mentioned in the sources?
There is, actually. A potentially positive one for D.C., ironically. The sources suggest that once Trump is out of office, his, quote, use and abuse of the district will create serious momentum for statehood.
Statehood for D.C., that's been talked about for years.
Exactly. And they argue it probably should already have happened anyhow.
No.
But this whole situation could generate more sympathy for D.C. residents and, push it forward.
But statehood bills face the filibuster, right? Need 60 votes in the Senate.
Usually, yes.
Yeah.
But the source points out it only takes 51 votes, or 50 plus the VP tiebreaker, to create a specific carve-out for the filibuster rule.
Ah, a procedural move.
Right. And they think a carve-out just for D.C. statehood carries a relatively low risk of payback. So these actions could inadvertently pave the way.
Fascinating. Okay, let's shift gears now. From D.C. to the global stage, let's talk economics, specifically China. What was going on with tariffs recently?
Right, so the situation was that tariffs on Chinese imports were apparently set to jump way up.
How high?
The source mentions 145%. They call it a comic book number.
145%. Wow.
Yeah, something that high would almost certainly trigger some kind of financial crisis. Panic in the markets,
Okay, so what actually happened? Did they go up?
No. Instead, Trump decided to extend the deadline for negotiations.
How long?
Another 90 days.
What's the strategy there? Especially thinking about, the relationship between the administration and China.
Well, the sources bring up a really interesting cultural point here.
Okay.
They describe China as an honor-shame culture, meaning things like public image, avoiding humiliation, saving face. Those are extremely important.
Right.
So the thinking is Xi Jinping understands very well that any sort of resolution will need to be structured so that Trump can declare a win and save face.
Allow him to look strong, essentially.
Pretty much. The sources also note that Trump seems somewhat leery of actually bringing the hammer down on China.
Any examples?
They cite his reluctance to force the sale of TikTok, even though Congress gave clear orders to do so. It suggests maybe a preference for the threat over the actual follow-through.
So given all that, what do the sources expect will happen with these negotiations?
They basically assume that, sometime in the reasonably near future, Trump will announce that he has secured a great trade deal with China.
A great deal.
Yep. And the details will probably involve a tariff rate much lower than that threatened 145%, plus maybe some vague promise of investment from China.
So a pattern of high threats followed by a more moderate deal that can be framed as a win.
That seems to be the pattern identified, yes, because he just did something similar with Mexico, another 90-day extension.
Right.
So now that's two of the U.S.'s three biggest trading partners, China and Mexico, getting these extensions.
Who's the third?
Canada. And the sources say things there are more tricky, possibly due to personal dynamics with Prime Minister Mark Carney and his stance.
Okay, so a consistent playbook, but with some variation. Let's pivot again, this time from global trade back to domestic institutions. Universities. The sources talk about universities being targeted. Why? What's the underlying reason given for this hostility towards education?
Well, the sources put forward a pretty stark argument. They say that if your goal is to keep a population under your thumb, then being hostile to education is a key tactic.
Why is that?
Because, they argue, educated people tend to see through the lies of autocratic regimes. They can often project forward, guess the long-term implications of policies, and they also know about resistance.
They provide historical examples.
They do. They mention leaders of major slave rebellions in U.S. history being educated black men. They talk about Mao Zedong targeting intellectuals in China, and how regimes in Poland, Turkey, Russia have all tried to control their universities.
Okay, so that's a general theory. How does it apply specifically to Trump, according to these sources?
The sources suggest Trump most certainly aspires to exercise dictator-like powers. And so, targeting prominent universities early on, what they call Trump v 2.0, serves a few purposes. It's a direct challenge to a potential power center that might oppose him. And it also lets him, avenge his own personal grievances. The source puts it bluntly. He hates pointy-headed academics because they make him feel stupid.
Right. So which universities were hit first, and why them?
The initial targets weren't too surprising, according to the analysis. Harvard, first off.
The big one.
Exactly. The absolute embodiment worldwide of elite academic institution. The only big three U.S. school, actually.
And the other.
Columbia University, right in New York City, America's biggest city.
And Columbia was prominent in the news recently.
It was. It was a major flashpoint for the Gaza protests.
Yeah.
And those protests provided the official justification for the administration to put pressure on universities, using the label of anti-Semitism.
Okay, Harvard and Columbia make sense based on that logic. But the sources mention a delay with UCLA. That seemed odd, given UCLA's profile.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point the sources dig into. UCLA, they say, checks an awful lot of boxes for the administration. It's surprising it wasn't in that first wave.
What kind of boxes?
Well, it's definitely an elite institution, maybe just a tier below the top Ivies. It's world famous, has huge name recognition, especially in Asia, Japan particularly.
Licensing and things like that.
Huge. Apparently, UCLA makes more money from licensing its name than any other university. You see movies filming there, big tourist groups.
Right. What else?
It rakes in the research funds. And research funding is the main lever the administration is using here.
The pressure point.
Exactly. While Ivies get money, the sources note Johns Hopkins is actually #1 for research funding.
Why Hopkins?
Because it hits all three big areas. Serious medical research, sure, expensive. 2, serious physics research, really expensive. And 3, a large student body and faculty. Lots of people to apply for grants. UCLA is up there too, though.
Okay, so elite, famous, lots of research money. What else makes UCLA a target?
Like Columbia, it was also the site of high-profile Gaza protests. It also has fairly new leadership. Chancellor Julio Frank just started in January. And the thinking is, inexperienced administrators are more likely to misstep, maybe easier to intimidate.
Location matters, too.
Big time. It's in California, which the source calls the hated state. Governor Gavin Newsom, a major Trump critic, is even an ex officio member of the UC Board of Regents.
Wow, direct connection.
And it's in Los Angeles, the hated city, which, as the source notes, has already served as a punching bag for Trump v. 2.0.
So, a lot of reasons. The delay is surprising, then.
Very.
So, the shoe finally dropped, as they say. What was the price demanded from UCLA?
Remember, they'd already frozen about $500 million in UCLA's research funds.
Okay.
The price revealed later was steep. A fine of $1 billion.
$1 billion.
$1 billion. Plus an agreement for significant changes to university governance.
How would they even pay that?
The deal proposed was an installment plan. $276 million a year for 3 years, plus another $172 million into a trust fund to settle lawsuits related to the protests.
Good grief. How does that compare to what other schools agreed to, and why would any university agree to these terms?
Well, Harvard reportedly made a deal involving policy changes and paying $500 million for vocational and educational programs.
$500 million. Still huge, but less than UCLA's fine.
Right. And Columbia and others agreed to similar deals. The sources suggest that university leaders, although they'd never say it publicly, will probably make these changes deliberately unenthusiastic.
Go through the motions?
Sort of, and plan to reverse them later. As for the money for vocational programs, the expectation is creative bookkeeping.
Like what?
Like reclassifying existing extension courses, things like photography, cooking, real estate, as fulfilling that requirement.
Okay, but still, why comply at all? Especially if, as the sources suggest, they think they'd probably win in court.
It comes down to a calculated decision, a risk assessment.
How so?
They know they'd almost certainly win in court. But almost certainly isn't certainly. There's still risk. And more importantly, if a major research project loses its funding for a year or two while the court case drags on, it probably dies.
All the work and money already invested.
Exactly. Lost. Plus, future funding jeopardized. So they pay what the source essentially calls a bribe.
A bribe to avoid court.
To avoid the long, expensive court case, salvage future research funds, and avoid potentially losing billions in partially completed research. It's a pragmatic, if painful, choice.
And the administration has lost in court sometimes?
Yes. The sources mentioned they actually lost a case just yesterday about arbitrarily freezing allocated funds, even with a Trump-appointed judge presiding.
So the legal route isn't guaranteed for the administration either. Are there key differences in UCLA's situation compared to Harvard or Columbia?
The sources point out 2 big ones, yeah.
Okay.
First, the sheer amount of money demanded from UCLA, that billion-dollar fine, is way higher. And UCLA, while wealthy, is not quite as well-heeled as Harvard. Taking a 9 or 10-figure hit is tougher for them.
Makes sense. What's the second difference?
This one could be the biggie. Governor Gavin Newsom.
Ah, him again.
Unlike governors in other states, Newsom reportedly plans to run for president in 2028, and he's actively looking for every opportunity to burnish his credentials as the Trump slayer.
So he might intervene.
He might. And crucially, he's part of UC governance as an ex officio regent. Any settlement agreement would have to be approved by the regents.
And Newsom could block it.
The sources suggest he might well use his influence to block that. It adds a whole other layer of political complexity for UCLA.
Definitely a wild card. And there was one more kind of surprising theory about why the UCLA action was delayed.
Yeah, sort of a speculative one, but interesting.
What is it?
Unlike most elite academic schools, UCLA is also an elite athletic school.
Right, big sports programs.
And college football season is just starting up.
Ah.
So the theory floated is that maybe the White House waited to maximize the attention it gets.
Use the football spotlight?
Yeah, the idea being this extortion attempt, as the source calls it, is likely to get mentioned at least a few times during coverage of the football team. It's a theory about leveraging media cycles.
That's quite the calculation, if true. Okay, let's shift from targeting institutions to targeting, well, reality itself. Numbers.
Yeah.
The sources talk about imaginary numbers. What's the issue there?
Well, connecting back to the point about educated people. Another issue for autocratic leaders, according to these sources, is that educated folks tend to know what the real numbers are.
Or at least have a ballpark idea.
Exactly. Or roughly what they should be. So they can often sniff out fake numbers.
Which is a problem if you're trying to create your own reality.
Precisely. It's a problem for Trump, who is trying to create his own economic and statistical reality, as the source puts it.
So how is this playing out with government agencies that handle data, like the Bureau of Labor Statistics?
Well, the sources report that he fired the head of the BLS, Dr. Erica McIntyre, who was described as actually qualified.
Fired her. And replaced her with whom?
He tapped an economist from the Heritage Foundation named E.J. Antoni.
Heritage Foundation. Okay. What are Antoni's qualifications, according to the sources?
Well, on paper, he has advanced degrees in economics, master's and PhD, and some public sector experience. But the sources note he only finished his PhD in 2020. So, not exactly what you would call experienced.
Relatively new.
And his degrees are from Northern Illinois University. The sources make a point of saying he very noticeably avoids mentioning the name of his alma mater on his official bio.
Anything else?
Yes, the bigger issue highlighted is his employer, the Heritage Foundation, described as the same right-wing think tank that employs Stephen Moore.
Stephen Moore, the economist who reportedly visited the Oval Office recently.
To spin fantasies about the employment numbers, according to the source, yes. And before Heritage, Antoni worked at another right-wing group, the Texas Public Policy Foundation.
So the implication is clear. What do the sources advise about BLS data going forward?
Basically take anything that comes out of BLS for the next 3 years with multiple barrels of salt.
Multiple barrels. Strong warning.
They suggest that picking this lightly qualified think tanker is exactly what you expect if Trump couldn't get a more, quote, legitimate candidate to behave corruptly. It raises serious questions about data integrity.
And it wasn't just economic data, right? There was another database issue mentioned.
That's right. The White House was also reportedly trying to make a database private one that tracks federal spending.
Why would they do that?
The source suggests the obvious purpose here is to hide outlays on things that might not be so popular, and potentially also to hide any illegal impoundment of funds, refusing to spend money Congress allocated.
Did they succeed?
No, they actually lost in court yesterday on that issue. But as of the time the source was written, the database has not been restored. So transparency is still lacking there.
Okay. From manipulating data to maybe the most direct form of power abuse.
Yeah.
Personal enrichment, using public office for private gain. What connection did the sources draw here?
They explain that one of the real telltale signs of a dictatorial leader throughout history is their use of their position to fill their own personal bank account.
They list examples.
Oh, yeah. Putin, Assad, the Shah of Iran, Franco, Saddam Hussein, the Castros, Papa Doc and Baby Doc Duvalier in Haiti, Pol Pot, Idi Amin.
A rogues gallery.
Right. All leaders who, according to the sources, ended up pilfering tens of millions or hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. It's a disturbingly common pattern.
So, turning to Trump, there was a big investigation mentioned by David Kirkpatrick at The New Yorker. What did that investigation estimate regarding how much Trump and his family have reportedly enriched themselves from the presidency?
The number is pretty staggering. The sources give an overall total estimate from Kirkpatrick's work of $3.372 billion.
$3.3 billion.
Billion, with a B. Now, there are some important caveats the sources mention.
Okay, like what?
Kirkpatrick apparently didn't assign much value to Trump's own claims about his brand being worth astronomical sums.
Right.
Also, some assets, like Truth Social, are expected to drop precipitously in value once he leaves office.
Makes sense.
And the key point, the sources suggest that while Trump was maybe somewhat cautious about profiting off the presidency at his first term, now all of that is out the window. Meaning the gloves are off, and any estimates for future enrichment, what the source calls grifting, are necessarily very preliminary.
This $3.3 billion is based on what's already known or estimated.
Okay, $3.3 billion. Let's try to unpack that. What are the major categories making up that total?
So Kirkpatrick breaks it down. First, licensing. That totals about $165.4 million.
Licensing his name.
Exactly. This includes at least 5 new deals for projects in the Gulf states worth over $100 million combined. The Trump Hanoi hotel deal, about $40 million.
Yeah.
And this thing called 1789 Capital.
What's that?
Apparently, it's a venture where the Trump family gets paid nearly $20 million just to lend their name to some right-wing social clubs.
Okay, $165 million in licensing. What's next?
Business ventures. That adds up to about $177.7 million. This is from his existing businesses.
Mostly. The biggest chunk, $125 million, is from dramatically increased membership fees at Mar-a-Lago.
Ah, doubling the fees after he became president.
Right. Then there's about $28 million from selling merch hats, shirts, even those blasphemous Bibles the source mentions, and an estimated $25 million in value derived from Truth Social.
Okay, licensing, business ventures, what else?
The biggest category by far, crypto, totaling nearly $2.37 billion.
$2.4 billion from crypto.
Roughly. Yeah, the source explicitly states crypto is the place to be for the contemporary grifter.
Wow. How does that break down?
Well, there were the collectible Trump trading cards, the NFTs that brought in over $14 million.
I remember those.
Then there are ventures reportedly involving his sons, something called World Liberty Financial Tokens, worth over $400 million, and a World Liberty Financial stablecoin worth over $240 million.
Okay.
Plus, the sons apparently licensed the family name to something called American Bitcoin for $13 million.
And Trump himself.
His own first crypto venture, called Trump Media, is valued at $1.3 billion in this estimate.
Yeah.
And his personal meme coin, Trump, is pegged at $385 million.
That is just astronomical. Is there another category?
Yes, a final category labeled Other. This totals about $661 million.
Okay, what's an other?
It's a mix. $100 million is attributed to campaign expenses, specifically legal and other personal costs paid by campaigns PACs.
Using campaign funds for personal legal bills.
That's the implication. Then there's $320 million in Saudi wealth management money, reportedly paid to Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump.
From the Saudis.
Yes. Also, $150 million attributed to the Qatari jet, which the source says was nominally Air Force One for some period of time.
And private jet funded by Qatar, used like Air Force One.
That seems to be the gist. And finally, $91 million from what Kirkpatrick calls corporate shakedowns, basically protection money paid to the Trumps by companies like CBS, Amazon, and others.
To avoid negative attention or action from the administration.
That appears to be the interpretation.
So adding all that up, licensing, business ventures, crypto, other, gets you to that $3.372 billion figure. It's just incredible. How does this compare, though, to the examples you gave earlier? Dictators directly stealing government funds.
That's an important distinction the source makes. While the Trumps have, according to this investigation, greatly enriched themselves, they haven't yet managed to directly steer billions in government funds into their own pockets in that classic direct plundering way.
So it's more leveraging the office for private deals and ventures.
Primarily, yes. Using the power and prestige of the presidency to boost existing businesses, create new ones, secure favorable deals, and draw investments, particularly from foreign sources.
But the source leaves the door open.
It does. It adds, time will tell if they try to change that. It notes these are people who, quote, can never, ever, ever have enough money, and that they've been awfully good at avoiding the criminal consequences of their actions, maybe feeling bulletproof at this point. So the source concludes, it could go either way. Direct plundering isn't off the table in the future, in their view.
A really sobering thought. We have certainly unpacked a lot today.
We really have.
From that federal assertion of power in D.C., the targeting of universities,
To global trade tactics, manipulating official data.
and ending with these truly astonishing figures about personal enrichment connected to public office.
Yeah, if you try to connect it all, see the bigger picture.
Yeah.
What seems to emerge is this complex web of strategies. Different ways power can be exerted, maybe ways to consolidate control across various parts of society.
Right.
It really highlights why it's so important to look past the headlines, Try to understand the motivations, the implications for our institutions, for the very information we rely on.
So the question for you, listening, is, what does all this mean? When you see these different kinds of power plays unfolding, controlling a city, pressuring universities, shaping trade deals, manipulating data, potentially enriching oneself, what does it reveal?
What does it tell us about those ongoing tensions between government authority and individual freedom?
Or between the official stories we're told and the underlying reality, especially now when we're all just drowning in information.
Definitely something to keep thinking about.